Hey y'all, I'm Carrie.
Hey y'all, I'm Mandy.
And this is Monstrous. This episode contains topics and language that may not be suitable for all listeners, and topics that may be triggering for some. Listener discretion is advised. Oh, my fucking shoulders still sting.
I bet.
Like they're still hot to the touch.
I bet they are.
Yeah. Hang on. I gotta move my camera. Look.
Oh shit.
Yeah. I got it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. My lower arms aren't that bad though. It's already freaking tanned.
Damn.
But halfway up my bicep, all this still stings.
That sucks.
Yeah, for sure. Does not feel good. It's what 6 hours in the sun for baseball will do to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad Dax decided, because Dax went to the pool party for baseball, but he didn't go to the actual scrimmage. I'm glad he didn't. I put everything on this, dude.
What do you mean?
Like I put aloe on like 6 times. I'm taking like 4 cool showers. 4:00 this morning. Everybody's gonna think I'm crazy. Okay, but it works. I promise. 4:00 this morning. I put mustard on it.
I've heard that.
And it actually does work. It does pull the sting out, but it did not work for this.
I heard that in tea bags.
See, I've never done tea bags, so I've heard tea bags. The mustard worked until I took a shower to wash it off.
Oh shit.
Now it stings again. But yeah, it really does work. Whatever. I burnt my arm on my stove. Remember me fucking sending you a picture of that where my skin came off and shit?
Mm-hmm.
I put mustard on that. And it pulls the sting out. It actually does work. And that's because the vinegar that's in it is why. Because I didn't have any white vinegar. So I was like, this will work. Does not feel good. So I keep getting cold because my skin is so hot. So I put my cardigan on. Then I get hot. And it irritates my skin even more because it's rubbing against my skin.
That's horrible.
Yeah, I can't win for shit.
And y'all are going to the pool today?
No, we were going to. But we go to the pool. It's just going to make my sunburn worse. So
Yeah, it is. It's gonna make it a lot worse.
yep, I don't plan on going outside of my house at all today.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
As I'm sure most of our listeners will know, the Karen Reed retrial is over. And there has been a verdict in that case.
Nice.
We are going to cover that one now that it's done.
Okay.
As far as Karen Reed goes, anyway. I'm not going to get it done this week, obviously. I think it was this last Monday when the verdict came in. So, but we're going to cover it because it's done, it's finished. It's one of those that it was featured on court TV, like all of that. So it's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to cover it so everybody knows. It's just going to be a little farther out.
Right.
So that being said, let me see. So we have our podcast anniversary coming up. Yep. Then right after that, we have spooky season.
My favorite.
So we got some pretty good cases on our list that we're working on to put out. One of them you're going to love, Mandy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And what's that?
It's the one that I said I wasn't going to tell you.
Oh, God. When are we doing that?
So we have the June 30th episode, and then we're going to take that following week off.
Mm-hmm.
So we have next week's episode, or the week after next, and then we're going to take that week of July 4th off. But instead of just doing the one episode, since we're taking that whole week off, we're going to do 3. And that's because the one that I'm not going to tell you I'm doing is a 2-parter.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to do 3 episodes the week of June 30th. We just have to decide what day to release the extra ones
Mm-hmm.
since we're going to take that week of July off. That way there's, everybody still has something to listen to.
Right.
And you're going to love that case. So
I'm ready to hear which one it is.
you'll be excited. Okay. So last couple things before we get into the case. So obviously, as you know, Mandy, we have an analytics system. Our listeners, I'm sure, don't know what that is. But it just keeps track of all of our stuff. According to those analytics, as of today, right before this recording, we have hit 900 listens.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that has been since we started.
That's awesome.
Right. So we're grateful to all of you, our listeners, that come back every week to listen to us. We love the fact that you come in and listen to all the craziness that we have.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I would love to share your personal stories on the podcast as well. So if you have, your own paranormal experiences, your own true crime connections, whether, to your hometown, a town you lived in, or really if there's anything you want to share with us, and that you want to share with your fellow listeners, just send that over. You send that to our email. You can send it to us on Facebook, on our YouTube, wherever you feel like sending it to. And we'll go through and maybe we'll pick a few every week or maybe once a month or something and read those back to you guys.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Yep. Just to kind of spooky tales or just whatever. Whatever you want us to know and share. So I'll put the email in the episode description. I'm probably going to just start putting the email address in all the episode descriptions. I think I might just start putting in there just because it's easier. I'll put it on the Facebook page as well because I can't remember if it's already on there or not. As we've said before, we love doing the podcast. It gives us something besides normal life to do.
Right. Yeah.
So we want to hear from you guys. Send us the email, leave us a comment, send us a Facebook message, whatever. Love to hear from you guys. Know what you have going on. Interact. All that fun stuff. Okay. So with all that being said, ready to get into it?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to shift gears from last week because we had some issues last week with our recording. Because
That was
for
a
some,
mess.
yeah, I don't know what happened, but we had some major issues. And hopefully we sound better. Hopefully we don't have the same issues that we were having.
Last week was bad.
Yeah. So last week you guys got that blooper episode because we had all those issues. Now we're going to shift gears from last week and you're going to hate today's case.
Oh, great.
Yep. It's going to stress you the fuck out.
Really?
We are going to talk about another plane crash.
Mm.
Yep. So today I'm going to tell you about the Eastern Airline Flight 401. I said you're going to hate it, but it's worth it. Promise. Because there's a little bit of the paranormal attached to it as well.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into it. So on December 29th, 1972, Eastern Airline Flight 401 was scheduled to fly from JFK International Airport in New York to the Miami International Airport in Florida at around 9:20 p.m. This was said to be about a 3-hour flight. On board the Lockheed L-101101 TriStar aircraft, there were 163 passengers and 13 crew members.
Uh-uh.
So there were 176 people on board total. So this was a newly constructed medium to long jet passengers jet. So basically, it's a jumbo jet. So it's a big ass fucking plane.
Mhm.
This specific airline had just bought this aircraft about 5 months before this takeoff. This type of plane was like state of the art at the time. And Eastern Airline had actually been the first one to buy one of these planes. And at the time, they had actually owned two of them. They purchased the first in April of 1972. And the other one, which is the one that we're talking about today, they purchased about six.
Yeah.
Um, so they bought this one about 3 months after they bought the first one. So this aircraft was obviously Flight 401, and it had accumulated 936 flight hours. It had landed 502 times by December 29th. So, from what I could find, this was pretty standard for the requirement for flight hours and all of that. So, as usual, the aircraft underwent a number of inspections before it took off, and it passed every single one of them. It was also up to date with all of the FAA guidelines. Okay, so everything on the plane was in working order, and it was in the condition that it should have been in order to complete this takeoff. So the captain was 55-year-old Robert Loft. He'd been employed with the airline since 1940, and he'd been flying for them since 1951. And then earlier that year, he had passed the L-1011 simulation tests. In the month leading up to the flight, his instructor sang his praises, pointed to how he had great knowledge of the aircraft and knew all of the procedures, all of that. The only thing that they insisted on was that he get glasses to correct his vision before flying in this size aircraft. But aside from this, he was cleared to fly, all of that. So the flight crew had a normal flight crew that you would expect. It included First Officer Albert Stockstill, who was 39, and then 59-year-old Second Officer Donald Repo. These two men had similar flight experiences as the captain, and like him, they both passed all of the training, all of the exams, all of that to be able to pilot this specific aircraft. The flight also had 10 flight attendants scheduled to work, and just like the men flying the plane, they received all of the training that was required to not only fly the plane, but also in order to be in the positions that the FFA required. So everyone in charge of this flight, both flight crew and those flying the plane, were all qualified to be a part of this flight. Now, after resting, preparing, and doing all the inspections that the FFA required, 163 passengers took their seats and prepared for their flight. Captain Loft was given clearance, and a little after 9:20 p.m. on December 29th, the plane lifted off and began the journey towards Miami. The flight was pretty uneventful. Everything went as it should have without any kind of issues. That was until the flight crew began preparing for the descent into the Miami International Airport. So when it comes to landing a plane, there's a standard approach, but there's no like blanket landing procedure. There's several things that come into play when a captain has to decide how to land a plane. That includes runway lengths, wind, weather, how big the aircraft is, and so on. And with this aircraft, this was no different. The way the plane was to be landed depended on each of these things. For this flight, the first thing that Robert Loft had to do was to first move the landing gear into position, which he would have done by shifting the landing gear handle in the down position. So, like shifting your car from park to drive.
Mhm.
So once this is done, there's a light that illuminates, and this light tells the flight crew that the plane is preparing to land, that the landing gear is all locked in, all of that. But this light did not come on.
Mm.
If you try to land with this light not on, your landing experience is not going to be pleasant. The wheels are just going to bounce back up into the plane,
Right.
and the front of your plane is going to hit the ground.
Yep.
So that light has to be on in order for a pilot to even attempt to land. So I'm going to tell you right up front, the light bulb was burnt out.
Damn.
Mhm.
Of all
So
things.
yeah, yep. So the light bulb didn't show up. So Robert decided to try it again. But once again, the light did not come on. With this now happening twice in a row, he obviously is like, what's wrong? Something happened. He didn't think, oh, maybe the bulb is just burnt out. He thought something was wrong with the landing gear. So, with this, he radioed the tower at Miami International Airport at 11:34 p.m. and reported the problem. He told them, quote, "This is Eastern 401. Looks like we're going to have to circle. We don't have a light on our nose gear yet." A few seconds later, the tower responded, telling Robert to go ahead and climb 2,000 feet, and then instructed him to again begin the descent after that, believing by climbing up another 2,000 feet and then back down, it would give them plenty of time to fix whatever was wrong. But 1 minute later, Robert radioed the tower again, telling them the plane was back in position. But they still were not able to get their green light on the nose gear. Thankfully, and by luck, the aircraft was not in danger of running out of fuel. So Loft and the crew knew that they had plenty of time to figure it out. They just had to have permission to continue to keep, doing this circle from the tower. Again, the crew was told to climb back up, do the descent for a third time while they continued trying to fix the issue. Robert acknowledged the transmission, then told First Officer Albert Stockstill to turn on autopilot and attempt to fix whatever the problem was. Now, this plane in 1972, autopilot was very sophisticated. Like, this plane could have landed itself if it had to.
Wow.
Yeah. So he engaged the autopilot. Then they began to focus on the light. Stockstill pulled off the faceplate that covered the nose gear light assemble, which basically it's a green panel that covers the light bulb, just like your lights on your car brake. The light's not actually red. It's just the cover that's red. It's just like that. He takes his cover off, sees the bulb was blown, so he obviously changed it, then replaced the panel. While he's doing this, the panel actually got jammed. So now he's trying to deal with that, struggling to get it into the correct position, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now with all this going on, Robert told Second Officer Donald Repo to go down into the electronic bay, which on this specific plane, it was located below the flight deck. You want to know what they called it?
What?
The hell hole.
Damn.
So Robert told Donald to go into the hellhole to, quote, visually check the alignment of the nose gear indices. I'm not going into anything that's called a hellhole.
Me neither. I'm good.
Whatever. So basically what they're doing, they're looking at everything, just trying to figure out what the fuck is going on with this thing. So now at this point, it's been 5 minutes since Robert first made contact with the tower about the issue they were having. So around 11:40. Roughly. Robert again radioed the tower to report the issue, telling them that it was not fixed and that they were still working on it. He then sent Don back into the hellhole to check everything there for a second time. 2 minutes later, Donald popped his head up through the latch and he basically told Robert that he had no idea what was going on. Like, he couldn't see anything. Now, from here, the tower of the airport traffic control notices that even though they had told the pilots to maintain their altitude of 2,000 feet, the plane had begun to descend in the last minute or two since they had last spoken. So at first, they had only dropped a few hundred feet. But then the plane dropped again, and this time they dropped for another 900 feet.
Damn.
So the piloting crew of Flight 401, not realizing that they had dropped, because they're messing with the light in the landing gear, trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, the autopilot had somehow become disengaged.
Holy shit.
So now the plane is free falling and no one is at the controls.
That's crazy.
So now at 11:41 p.m., the tower radios the flight crew and told them to correct course. Robert was like, "Oh, okay. Do I have permission, to get back into position for the descent?" But what he didn't realize was how far they had free fall. By this point, they had now free fallen a little over 1,000 feet from the ground. And he thought they were much higher than that. About 20 seconds later, the tower received another transmission from Flight 401. In the recording of this transmission, Albert was heard saying, quote, We did something to the altitude. We're still at 2,000, right? Then, about a second or two later, Robert is heard shouting, "Hey, what's going on?" After that, nothing. The transmission cuts out entirely.
Oh, wow.
Now, in the cabin, one of the flight attendants, her name is Beverly Raposa, thought she had heard an unusual sound. She had looked over to her coworker named Stephanie Stanich and told her that she didn't think the engine sounded right. To which Stephanie was like, "No, they sound fine to me." Beverly's like, "No, ma'am, they do not sound fine." And seconds later, the plane tilted and violently took a nosedive, beginning a rapid descent towards the ground. So at 11:42, just after the last transmission from the plane came into the tower, they of course sent a transmission out saying, quote, "Eastern 401, I've lost you. On the radar, there your transponder. What's your altitude now? Eastern 401 Miami." But as we know, it went unanswered. And another plane who had seen something had radioed the tower telling them that they had seen a flash out west. They weren't sure what it was, but they felt like they needed to report they had seen something. Just before all this, after what I'm sure seemed like fucking forever, could you imagine just nose diving in a plane? No.
No.
Anyway, so what seemed like fucking forever, I'm sure, Flight 401 violently crashed into the densely forested swamps of the Florida Everglades.
Everglades?
Yep. The flash that was reported to the tower was the explosion from Flight 401 as it crashed.
That's what they saw?
Yep.
Holy shit.
So now on the evening of December 29th, the temperature in Miami was around 72 degrees. They had clear weather and perfect visibility. Like, these were perfect flying conditions. There was no clouds. Aside from there being no light from the moon, perfect. The crash happened in literal complete darkness. The plane itself had crashed 20 miles northeast of the airport and about 8 miles north of the Palmetto Expressway.
Damn.
So another 8 miles to one direction, they would have crashed right into a road.
That's wild.
Right? The area where the plane now sat was flat marshland. It was covered in soft mud, and it sat under about 6 to 12 inches of swamp water. Yeah. Although this was, of course, horrific, it softened the impact when the plane hit the ground. But it was still not a soft landing by any means.
I bet.
It just kept it from being worse than it already was. And it's bad. The left wing of the plane hit the water first, and the rest of the plane just followed suit, with the engine hitting next, then followed by the left portion of the landing gear. The aircraft then skidded across the marshy water and the sawgrass for a third of a mile, and it broke up, disintegrating as it went and followed this path.
Holy shit.
This destroyed nearly every section of the passenger compartment. On top of that, when the wing hit the muddy water, the plane then went into a pinwheel motion, which broke the plane into 4 separate sections. This caused luggage, plane debris to become scattered all across 1,600 foot long and a 300 foot wide area. So there's just shit every fucking where.
Right.
So no one, you're not getting your stuff back. Hope you had it insured. Now, unfortunately, this crash claimed the lives of 101 people and injured 75 others. So the survivors were injured, but 75 of them were able to make it out alive. They had just went through something that no one could ever imagine, and it wasn't over yet. They were literally in a nightmare situation. Like, shit you not. It is pitch black where they have now crashed. Some of them have been thrown to the plane while others are still strapped into their seats. They're all either sitting or lying down in a mixture of muddy swamp water and the leaking jet fuel that is coming from the plane. Almost 22 tons or 44,000 pounds of jet fuel is now at this point leaking into the swamp.
Oh,
And those, both dead and alive, are just sitting and lying in this extremely flammable and dangerous swamp water. Yeah. So one of these passengers was a man named Ron Infantino. He went on to say that when he realized what had happened, he obviously started to panic. He called out to his wife, Lily, who had also been on the plane with him. The two had only been married 20 days at the time of the crash.
aw, that's sad.
He couldn't move. Like, literally, all he could do was sit there in this gross ass water, just helpless, calling for his wife because the crash had broken his arm, his knee, and he had a wound to his chest. Then all of it became worse when he, quote, heard alligators and snakes splash around him.
Oh, hell no.
Yep. Because remember, it's the Florida Everglades. There's like almost 200 people, some dead, some still alive. They're all laying in this water. And now that the initial crash is over and it's kind of calmed down now, they're like smelling the blood in the water. So they're coming closer to find out what's going on and to essentially eat.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah. So this is, like I said, literally a fucking nightmare situation.
Right.
Like, this is what scary movies are made from. Okay, Ron would later go to find out that his wife had died during the crash. Now, in a different part of the swamp, flight attendant Mercy Ruiz, I think is how you say it, had just regained consciousness, and she found herself cold, shivering, and covered in kerosene.
Uh,
She was unable to move because she had fractured her pelvis. Now, Beverly Raposa, who she was the one that was like, engine doesn't sound right, um, was near Mercy. She had asked her what had happened, to which Beverly said, "Well, we crashed." Mercy couldn't comprehend it. She was like, "No, we didn't. This is just a bad dream. We didn't just crash." I feel like anybody would really be like that, to be honest.
mhm.
Beverly got up and she did everything that she could to help literally everyone around her. She wished she could have made them comfortable. All that during the immediate aftermath. During this time is when the first rescuers arrived. This was a man named Bud and his friend. There's always a man named Bud. These two had just simply been there by chance. Like, they didn't go out there looking for these people. They just happened to be there. They had been in the swamp in his airboat. Bud was teaching his friend how to hunt frogs at the time of the crash. They had saw a bright flash of light, and he just kind of steered his boat in that direction to see what was going on and if there was anyone that needed help. He used his headlamp to make his way through the swamp. So he'd move a short distance, shut off his airboat because, they're really loud. Listen for any kind of sound that you wouldn't normally hear in the swamp. And he did that like 4 or 5 times before he finally heard something in the distance. As they moved closer, the men could hear pure chaos. They said at first it sounded like moaning. Then, as they got closer, he could hear people screaming for help. They finally reached the crash site where the first distinct voice they could hear was a man screaming, quote, "I can't hold my head up anymore." So Bud rushes over to the man whose voice he had heard. He jumps into the water and pulls him out before the man can drown. All around him, he said he could see pieces of metal from the plane and bodies. And then remember, all he has is a headlamp. So although what he sees,
Right.
it's horrific, it's only a little bit of the full carnage that's around him. Like, Bud's a hero. So he's obviously not a doctor. He didn't know what the fuck to do. The water's full of alligators and snakes. His legs are burning because of the jet fuel that's now filled the swamp water. But he put all of that aside and waded through the swamp, helping every person that he could. He would end up spending so much time in this jet filled swamp water, helping those that needed it. The following week, he had to go and be treated from burns that he had sustained on his legs because of that jet fuel.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Then, without Bud and his boat, the Coast Guard, it would have taken them even longer to get to the people following the crash. So not only is he putting his own life and his own health at risk to help these people, but he uses his boat to get the Coast Guard there, because without it, they would have just been standing around like, how the fuck do we get out there? So obviously, the Coast Guard is informed of the crash. They're dispatched, all of that. They go out there, but where the plane had crashed, the Coast Guard couldn't get to it with their helicopters. And there was no indication of where the plane had crashed for the Coast Guard to find. So it was obviously on fire, right? But when it hit the swamp put the fire out. So there was nothing for them to even look for. They just knew there was a crash out there somewhere. So, they go out, right? They arrive, they're looking from their helicopter, try to figure out where to even land the plane because they had to get it as close as they could, but they couldn't find anything. Later, Petty Officer John Schneck said, I couldn't see the crash. It was pitch dark. They couldn't see shit. But on the ground, Bud recognized the sound of the helicopter. And knowing that they wouldn't be able to see, he took his headlamp and pointed it towards the sky, which got the Coast Guard's attention. He used his headlamp to then direct them to a levee where they could land the helicopter. And then he went there and used his airboat to transport the Coast Guard to the site.
Damn, you're smart.
Right? So now once they all get there, first responders make their way around the scene. While they did all this, the flight attendant, Beverly Raposa, and Pat George are gathering the survivors that can move on their own. They all get together in one specific area so they're easy to find, and they all start singing Christmas carols.
Christmas carols?
Yeah.
Why Christmas carols?
Well, because it's right after Christmas. And I think it was just kind of a way to maybe distract them
Yeah.
from what was happening. It's like, So all this happening at the scene on the ground, right? They're searching the general area of the Everglades to locate all the survivors, and then additional helicopters were sent out to fly over the area to provide any kind of help on the ground. But again, it's dark, so I'm not really sure what kind of help they could be. I don't know. Maybe they got lights up there or something. I don't know. So now Bud's going to come back in. Once the Coast Guard found a survivor, and it was confirmed that they could be moved without causing any further injury, they would put the survivor in Bud's airboat, and Bud would take them to the levee where they would be transported to the nearest hospital, which is like my guy. You know what I mean? Like, you're just being so helpful out here.
He's awesome.
I wouldn't know what to do. One of the first survivors to be found was Captain Robert Loft, who was still inside the cockpit, but he was not in good condition. Robert had cuts all over his body, and it was clear to first responder John Schneck that he had also broken some of his ribs. John had told Robert to hang on, that more people were coming to help, to which Robert responded with, I'm going to die. And shortly after this, he did pass away on scene.
Who knew?
Donald Repo, who was also in the cockpit, had also survived the initial crash. He was taken to the hospital, but he too would later pass away due to his injuries. Yeah. So are you now ready to hear just a little bit of how fucking awful humans are?
I know how awful humans are.
Well, this just
It's gonna make it worse.
Yeah. So while rescuers and first responders are trying to get all these people out alive and then find those that had passed away, they watched in horror as several locals showed up to the crash site and began to loot the dead bodies.
What do you, like steal from them?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Like, there's still people alive stuck in this water. And you're stealing people's shit. Like, I get it. Like, what can they do with it? But
Yeah, but still, dude, that's bogus.
how about you help?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which that was the thought process. Like I said, that was the thought process. They're dead. What can they can't use it now.
Yeah, but I would have never thought of something like that.
Right, exactly. Like, I get that's what you're thinking, but these are dead people. there are people alive still needing help, and that's your concern.
Yeah, that's why I like dogs better than humans.
Right. The most they steal from you is your food.
I know, right?
But what could the rescuers and first responders do? They had to focus on getting those injured and still alive out, but then also recover those that didn't. So they didn't have time to worry about getting these piece of shit fucking awful human beings out of there. Because
Right.
for these people that were still alive, literally every second counted. They're in jet fuel filled fucking swamp water with alligators and snakes.
Yeah, we need to get 'em out of there.
Yeah. So, which I've said it once, I'm going to say it again, and I will continue to say it. People are fucking trash,
Yeah.
which is why I hate people. Like, you heard it here first. Okay? We need shirts. We need all the things. That is our new motto. People are trash.
My shirt says less people, more dogs.
Yeah, because people are trash. Like, fucking get it together. Anyway, so crews worked through the night to locate the living, and they slowly and carefully removed each of them from the swamps. So that way, they wouldn't hurt them anymore by mistake, and that way they could get the much needed medical attention.
Right.
Now, the dead would go on to be removed as well, but the FAA had instructed them to focus on the living for the time being, get them out of there because they wanted to save as many people as they could. And this was difficult because in the pitch black, marshy swamp, telling the alive from the dead was not easy.
Oh, I bet. Especially if they weren't able to talk or move.
Right, exactly. And some of them weren't.
Right.
So it's very difficult. Then they have to be aware and conscious that there's alligators and snakes.
Mhm.
So it was a very long, a very slow process. Now, eventually, and unfortunately, the bodies of those that had passed away had begun to sink under the water. So once this started to happen, those that were still alive were able to be seen faster. And that made the recovery process become faster. But it also made the recovery process for those that had passed even harder. By the time that the rescuers had located and removed all 77 survivors. In the following days, a new crew was brought in to locate and recover the bodies of those that had unfortunately not survived. And as we can all assume, this process was not easy. It was hard with those living because it was dark, and some of their injuries made it difficult. But for those that had passed, and some, like I said, had begun to sink under the water, so locating all of them was extremely difficult. Then you have the alligators too.
Mhm.
So this process was even slower than it was to find those that were alive. But finally, they recovered the final body on December 31st. This body was found buried under the thick mud of the swamp, and the only reason that they had been able to find it was because their hand had been sticking up out of the mud.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, other than the captain and the first officer that I mentioned earlier who had died right after they were found, and then one had died in the hospital, a total of 99 other bodies had been recovered, which included two flight attendants, Stephanie Stanek and Pat Geisels, I think is how you say it. And then the last member of the flight crew inside the cockpit, First Officer Albert John Stockstill. Now, those that had survived were still in the hospital. And here, they learned that they had contracted a life threatening infection from the very mud that had plugged their wounds and essentially saved their lives while in the swamp.
Holy shit.
So, the mud that saved their lives was found to house an organism that can cause gas gangrene, which is an infection that spreads fast and causes an infection inside the muscle tissue. This infection causes tissue to die, causes your body to produce extra gas, and has a high rate of death if it is left untreated. From the time you contract this infection, you have 48 hours at the most to get treated, or it will kill you.
Holy shit.
Mm-hmm. After running tests, 8 of the survivors had this infection. one of which was Ron, whose wife Lily had died in the plane. So doctors had told him specifically that if they could not locate a hyperbaric chamber to kill off the infection, they would have to amputate his arm.
Oh shit.
So this poor fucking guy, like, I feel so bad for him. Like, I'm not trying to laugh. It's just, I feel so bad. He gets married less than a month ago. His plane crashes. He loses his brand new wife in said plane crash, to which he blames himself for because the two had actually traded seats at some point in the flight. Now he's being told that he has a life threatening infection. And, oh, by the way, if we can't find this chamber to put you in so, we can kill the infection, we're going to have to cut your arm off.
Yeah, to deal with.
Right? Like, I can't. I would be like, just fucking kill me now. Just kill me now. Get it over with. Thankfully, though, they were able to find a chamber at a Navy base in Panama City, and so they transferred him there. Once he arrived, Ron spent 40 hours inside this chamber.
Yeah.
And this chamber is the only way to kill this bacteria that causes this infection. They have to put you in this hyperbaric chamber, and it's just full of pressurized oxygen. It's the only fucking way to kill it. Can you say major PTSD?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm good. So, weeks after the crash, the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, began their investigation because, of course, they're going to. They want to know what the hell happened and how could they avoid this ever happening again. At the time, this was the first jumbo jet to crash. And also at the time, it was the largest death toll in U.S. civil aviation.
Wow.
Yeah. There would be more to come later that had larger death tolls, but at the time, this was the worst.
Right.
So now, after listening to the transmissions, it was clear that something had went wrong with the landing gear. So, according to the report, the power plants, airframes, electrical and pilot static instruments, flight controls, anti-hydraulic, and electrical systems were not factors that contributed to the crash. So they were like, all of this was good. Nothing was wrong with this stuff. So now, having ruled out any kind of mechanical failures, the NTSB reviewed the autopsies and the medical histories of two of the flight crew members, and that was Don Repo and Robert Loft. Don Repo's autopsy and history showed there was really nothing significant, but the postmortem examination of Captain Robert Loft showed that he had a tumor in his head, which the medical examiner had noted would have affected his vision, specifically where his peripheral vision was concerned. Now, with the pathologist's findings, the NTSB investigators are thinking, Robert Loft's vision was probably what was wrong here. He didn't notice that the ultimative readings had dropped, letting him know, hey, this is where we're at. And they, at this point, think that's what led to the accident. However, this was quickly dismissed whenever they interviewed family and friends and even coworkers who said that they didn't see any kind of noticeable change in his vision or him himself. They all said that he had been able to perform all of the tasks within his daily life as a pilot. And then the pathologist went on to acknowledge that this type of tumor had presented itself very slowly, which gave the person that was affected plenty of time to adapt and compensate for the change in their vision. So he could have just had it for so long that it didn't affect him. He knew how to deal with it. So for now, they're like, okay, well, that's probably not what did it. But it was most likely and definitely a contributing factor, but not the actual cause. Now, this investigation happened over a few months. It wasn't like a quick thing. Once it was all said and done, the NTSB came to the conclusion that the crash of Flight 401 was due to a mixture of highly unusual occurrences and errors that could ultimately be chalked up to a lack of vigilance among the flight crew. So the following that I'm going to read you was taken into consideration and is from the NTSB. 1. The approach and landing routine was interrupted by abnormal gear indication. The autopilot was engaged to reduce workload, but positive delegation of aircraft control was not established. So they're saying basically they turned on the autopilot and just walked away. That they should have engaged it so that all three of them could work on figuring out what the hell was going on with the landing gear, but that someone should still have been paying attention to ensure the autopilot was doing what it was supposed to do. And like I said, the the autopilot system, like I said, was high tech, state of the art, and it could have landed itself as well as fly itself, which that's what autopilot's supposed to do. But you still have to have someone ensuring that it doesn't shut off or do some crazy shit. Didn't do that. With this crash, they did find out after that there were certain issues with the autopilot on this particular jet because it was so new. They also found that pilots in previous flights on this particular type of jet had relied too much on the autopilot. The nose gear position light lens assembly was removed and incorrectly reinstalled, which we knew.
Mhm.
It said that the captain had divided his attention between attempts to help the first officer and orders to other crew members to try other approaches to fix the problem. And finally, the flight crew devoted approximately 4 minutes to the distraction with minimal regard for the other flight requirements. So they're basically saying they put way too much manpower for far too long for this one tiny problem, and there was not enough delegation that went around. Yeah. So in simpler terms, what happened was they put it into autopilot. The flight crew then was preoccupied, but so much time into trying to figure out what was going on with this nose gear light that one of them had accidentally bumped the autopilot control and shut it off, and no one realized it.
Oh shit.
Now, the second thing that investigators wanted to look into, because maybe it could help in the future, was the relatively high survival rate of the passengers. Like I said, Flight 401 still today is one of the worst air disasters to ever occur here in the US, and it resulted in a total loss of the aircraft. But what surprised everyone was the number of survivors because the crash was so bad. Like, realistically, none of them should have survived.
Right.
And to top it off, most of them had relatively minor injuries, shockingly. Investigators couldn't say with 100% certainty, but they theorized that the larger section of the mid fuselage, which that's where most of the survivors were seated. So the mid fuselage is like basically the middle of the plane. And somehow that whole section had managed to stay intact. So, quote, until the velocity was considerably reduced or until these sections came to a complete stop. So, they had come to the conclusion that the passengers in this specific section has sustained far fewer injuries than those anywhere else inside the plane when it broke apart. And that's probably because, like, if you get on a plane, they say that the safest place to sit is where the wings are, directly in the middle, which I would think that that would be the worst place to sit.
I would too.
But apparently it's the safest. Investigators also believe that the relatively new design of the seats, which, quote, incorporated energy absorbers into the support structure, could have also explained the high number of survivors. Which I don't understand how an energy absorber inside of a seat could determine if someone survives, but so now that I've gone through all that technical stuff, we're going to break it down just a little bit because this cause of the crash is much simpler than what the NTSB makes it sound like. During this investigation, they found that the landing gear on the right side of the plane was down and in the lock position. But when the plane crashed, it had been torn away from the plane. The landing gear inside the cockpit was also in the down position, meaning the landing gear was engaged at the time of the crash.
Oh shit.
They then did a search of the electronics bay, or the hellhole, as they called it, and here they found that the visual indicator sight and the wheel wall service light assembly were both in functioning operational order. And they found that the bulb in the nose gear assembly had burnt out, like I said earlier.
Hmm.
So, in conclusion, aside of what could be possible contributors, the overall and real cause of the crash, what set this entire fucking thing in motion, what caused one of the worst disasters in aviation history was simply a $12 blown light bulb.
That's fucking insane.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Just a light bulb. That's all it was.
Good.
So, after the release of the NTSB's report on the investigation, many of the survivors and families of those that had not survived, of course, filed lawsuits against Eastern Air, which, same.
Yeah, I would too.
Checking the function of the light bulbs and ensuring that they wouldn't burn out should have been on the checklist of things you do before you take off. And if it would have been, this crash would have never happened. So eventually, after a ton of legal shit, and all the things that come with these big type of lawsuits, Eastern Air paid out, are you ready?
Hmm.
More than $50 million in damages.
Holy shit.
Do you want to hear what that would be in today's money?
What?
383 million. Yeah.
Oh.
Right. Now, with like many things here in America, the tragedy of Flight 401 was almost immediately incorporated into Florida's folklore. But what is surprising is that the supernatural phenomenon around this case started happening before the flight had ever taken off. So, according to local Florida writer Greg Jenkins, who wrote Florida's Ghostly Legends and Haunted Folklore, one of the flight attendants who had actually been originally scheduled to work on Flight 401 that day started having nightmares and what she believed were psychic visions of the catastrophic crash in early December.
What?
Yeah. According to Greg, during these nightmares, quote, she heard sobbing and crying and echoing in her head. And eventually, her dreams became so strong and vivid that she started telling her friends and her colleagues about them. She said that she was completely convinced, quote, a Lockheed TriStar jet would be approaching the Miami International Airport and crash, killing everyone.
That's wild.
As her dreams and visions went on, they started to include things like Christmas presents and holiday wreaths, which all led her to believe that whatever was going to happen was going to happen very soon.
That's some final destination shit.
Right? That's the same thing that I thought. So then on December 29th, there was a last minute change to the crew schedule. And that resulted in several flight attendants being put on this particular flight at the last minute. And three of them, including this woman who had these premonitions about the accident, ended up declining the shift because she had talked about it so much that they were all freaked out. We're like, nah, I'm good.
Right.
I don't need money that bad. The next day, when the woman who had had the nightmares learned of the crash, she said all the visions and the dreams made sense now. Christmas presents, holiday wreaths, the apparition that she had seen of, quote, hand stretched outward, then disappearing forever with muffled screams. Which, to add to the spookiness to all of it, that is, if you remember, that is how the last body was found, with their hands stretched up out of the mud.
That's wild.
Right? All of that took place before the plane ever even took off. Now, also according to Greg Jenkins, the first report of an apparition that was associated with Flight 401, which were quite frequent after the crash, by the way, was from Eastern Air's own vice president.
Really?
Yeah. It said that he boarded a flight to Miami just months after the crash on the exact same kind of plane, which, no fucking way. There's no way I would get on the exact kind of plane and fly through the exact area where a major crash just happened a few months prior.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah. No, thank you. So some people had actually said that this plane that he was on was made from recycled parts of the plane that had crashed before. But Eastern Airlines was adamant that this never happened. No parts were recycled and is very debated when it comes to this story. It's simply alleged, but I don't see how that's possible when the plane was just random pieces of metal. It was completely torn apart and destroyed. So I could be wrong. I think it's just one of those things that somebody said and people just ran with it. So Eastern Airlines does not exist anymore, just so everyone knows. So if you go fly, you don't have to worry about flying on that airline. They don't exist. So anyway, this man, the vice president of Eastern Air, boards the plane at JFK in New York. He takes his seat in first class section of the airplane, and he notices that he's sitting next to one of Eastern Airlines pilots. He said this guy's, quote, eyes were fixated on something outside the window. So he, tried to strike up a conversation with the guy, but he said he was so focused on whatever it was that was out the window, he never said anything. He didn't look back, nothing. The vice president said for the vice president first noticed, quote, the sad, pale face before realizing that he was staring at none other than the late Captain Robert Loft.
Oh, shit.
He said he, quote, got the feeling one gets when discovering a dead body or seeing a ghost. He said seconds later, the apparition of Loft just evaporated right before his eyes. He said it freaked him out so badly that he had actually hopped out of his seat and alerted the flight attendant, even went out to the ticket agency to see who had been seated next to him on the flight. And according to author John Fuller, quote, a complete search of the plane and the area was made, but there was no sign of the man who resembled Loft, and there was no other Eastern employees on the flight that day.
That's wild.
Also, according to Fuller, additional sightings of Loft followed soon after this, most often on flights from JFK to Miami. Many of those who spotted the apparitions were actually Eastern Airline employees themselves, several of whom had actually worked personally with Loft. And every time they saw his face, they were shocked because they knew what happened.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many sightings of Robert Loft that allegedly Eastern Airlines warned their employees not to talk about it.
That's crazy.
So now, while Captain Loft was a frequently reported apparition on Eastern flights, before long, there were other ghost reports as well, including that of Second Officer Donald Repo. One instance reported a passenger traveling on Eastern Air Flight 318, which was the same kind of aircraft that crashed in 1972, had reported sitting next to an Eastern employee on her flight to Miami. And she said that she noticed this man sitting next to her looked pale and he looked really sick. So she asked him if he was all right. He didn't respond to her. He just looked straight ahead. Still concerned, the woman pushed the call button to get the flight attendant because she's like, something's not right with this guy. Like, he might need help. But by the time the flight attendant arrived, the man next to her had just disappeared.
That'd be crazy.
Then later, when the plane had landed, the flight attendant had asked the woman if she wanted to look over some recent photos of Eastern Airline employees to see if she could see who it was, because, they're concerned at this point. And she's like, yeah, of course. Eventually, they came across a group photo of Eastern pilots. The woman points to one of the pilots as the man sitting next to her. The flight attendant and the woman were both stunned when they turned the picture over and saw the inscription, which read, "In Memorial, Flight 401, December 29th, 1972. The man that she had
That would be scary.
right? The man that she pointed to was Second Officer Donald Repo. Now, weirdly enough, as the years passed, Flight 318 became a very frequent host for the spirits of Flight 401. In another instance, a crew of Marriott caterers loaded food into the gallery and they left the plane abruptly, refusing to get back on board. The flight crew, of course, they're like, what the fuck is going on right now? And they told them that they saw a flight engineer standing in the gallery who instantly disappeared right before their eyes. So these caterers are like, no, not doing that. And they noped right the fuck out of that plane. Like, call somebody else. So then on another flight from New York to Miami, while the aircraft was flying over the Everglades, a male voice came over the PA and announced that they'd be landing soon, instructing everyone to fasten their safety belts. Later, one of the crew members said that they did not recognize the voice. and it was discovered that none of the flight crew had made that announcement. Now, as time passed, there were more and more sightings, most often of loft or repo. But there were also unusual circumstances that eventually led people to wonder if Flight 401 was a jinxed number. In 1980, this became a big source of some serious speculation when an Eastern Air Flight 107 from New York to Miami was hijacked, and it was flown to Cuba with 225 passengers on board.
That's insane.
This superstition became even more real for passenger Jerry Steinem, who had traveled to New York and was supposed to be on Flight 401 in 1972. But because he had come down with pneumonia and it had kept him from getting on the plane that day. Now, here he is 8 years later in New York again, and he was planning to return on Eastern Air to Florida. But on the morning of that exact flight that was hijacked, he overslept and he had to take a different flight, landing him on this particular air flight, which was then hijacked. So he was supposed to be on the original flight that crashed, but he got sick. Didn't end up on that flight. Now, here he is, was supposed to be on one flight, but because he overslept, he is on this flight, which is now hijacked. Right? So reports of the supernatural phenomena related to Flight 401 they're vague. And not really a whole lot of details aside from what I told you. But they did happen very often. Most of them, it was people, spotting loft or repo in a crowd. But in other cases, one of the two had appeared to point out malfunctioning systems or other problems to flight crews on Eastern air flights. So it's like they were there to hey, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
One of the last ever reported reports was when Donald Repo appeared to an Eastern Airline pilot. He had warned him to watch out for fire on his plane. Then, a few days later, there was a small fire in the cockpit of his plane.
Holy shit.
After this, Donald again appeared to a different Eastern employee and informed the navigator, quote, there will never be another crash on a TriStar. We will not let that happen again. And then he disappeared. According to Jenkins, this was the last reported sighting of Donald Repo. Eventually, the reports of ghostly visitors and psychic premonitions became so common that author and paranormal enthusiast John G. Fuller, who I mentioned before, collected them into one solid book, along with his experiences investigating those phenomena. His book, titled The Ghost Flight of 401, was published in 1976, so 4 years after the crash. He says the purpose of his book is to tell, quote, the supernatural aftermath more awful than the crash itself. So he's like, the aftermath of the supernatural is worse than the crash. Which I don't feel like it is.
Me either.
But that's just me. I feel like the crash is the worst part.
Yeah, me too.
But not everyone is so enthusiastic about his publication as he is. And those critics became even more vocal just a few years later when the book was adapted into a TV movie of the same name. This movie starred Kim Basinger and Ernest Borgnine. I don't think I know either one of those. With all this bad press, in an effort to mitigate any more of it, officials at Eastern Air tried to keep ahead of that story. They refused any claims of paranormal experience related to Flight 401. They told reporters that the ghost stories may have begun, just as a joke between the employees, but it had found its way to everyone else. The airline had a legend. They were never going to get rid of it, no matter what they said. It was there. I mean, look, we're still talking about it today, and the airline doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
Now, they never took any formal steps to shut down Fuller's book or stop any rumors, but they did consider doing so when they said Fuller began reporting that parts from the destroyed plane were recycled and put into other Eastern aircrafts. But he wasn't the only person to say that, like I said. So if they were going to take action against him for this, why wouldn't they take action against everyone else? Why wouldn't they take action against him for writing his book? Because the ghost stories are true.
Right.
It's not a lie. I don't think they ever used recycled parts. The plane was practically destroyed. So, what parts would there be to use? But I wasn't there. So now, more than 50 years later, a lot of the survivors from Flight 401 have passed away. And in 2022, the remaining survivors fundraised and lobbied the state until they received the approval to install a memorial on Curtis Parkway in Miami Springs, which lists the names of all those that died. Which, why did you have to fundraise and lobby the state to get approval for that? They should have just done it. Beverly Raposa had spearheaded this effort to get the monument placed, and she said, quote, "I carry these folks in my heart every single day. There has not been one day in the past 50 years that they haven't been in my heart. And then I haven't wanted to make sure that I keep my promise to them." So I'm sure everyone, like I said, happy to hear Eastern Airlines no longer exists. They shut their doors in 1991 because they failed to keep up. They just couldn't keep up with the new airlines. They were offering lower rates and all of that, which I'm not really surprised that they shut down.
Right? They don't have no money left.
Right, exactly. $338 million. Well, 50 million to them, but they're broke. They ain't got no money to keep up. So that's it. That is the tragic crash and the paranormal story of Eastern Airlines Flight 401.
I don't think I ever want to fly on a plane again. No, I'm good.
Like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Nothing went right. Hmm? That's it. That's all I got for this one.
It was an interesting one. Over a light bulb.
Yep. $12 light bulb. Easy fix. Yep. That's all I got. And then we have a bonus episode that comes out this Friday. Because today's the 22nd. Yep. That's a good one.
What's it talking about?
A family of serial killers.
Nice.
Yep. And it's an old one. We're going to the Old West.
That'd be a good one.
Oh, yeah. Going to the Wild West.
Nice.
Yep. So, I didn't mention at the top of the episode, I have kept a secret from all of our listeners. I wrote a book called The Hollow Game. It's currently on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, paperback, or hardcover. And I believe it's actually on Kindle Unlimited right now, if you have that. So that's exciting. I'll post the link to it in the episode description on here. I'll also put it on Facebook. And then once my copies get here, because I'm waiting for them to come in, I'll post pictures of them on the Facebook. And then put them on TikTok as well, so everyone can see what the printed books look like. So it's exciting.
That's awesome.
Yes, yay. We'll see what happens, see if everybody likes it.
And you can write another one.
I'm working on the second one.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I've got a few chapters of book 2 done.
Nice.
Yeah. Because it's going to have a second book with it. Lots of twists and turns in the first ones. There's a big reveal that you don't see coming. Ends for a second one. Working on that now. And this one has a really big reveal that you're not going to see coming too.
Nice.
Yeah. Really good. It's a psychological type thriller. So it's really good. So once you read it, Mandy, you'll have to tell our listeners what you think of it.
Well, from what I read, it already was sounding good.
Oh, yeah, because I did send you part of it, didn't I?
Yeah, you sent me part of it, but you didn't send me all of it.
I'll have to send you the rest of it. So that way that when we record on Friday, our listeners can get your unbiased opinion. Because obviously I think it's good, but I'm biased. I wrote it, so.
Right. But when I read it, definitely sounded like it's going to be a really good read. Very interesting.
We'll see what happens. So, okay. I believe that's it. Unless you got anything else. All right. Well, guys, we'll be back on Friday for our bonus for this month. As always, any of the picture I have a few pictures for this episode. So those could be found on our Facebook page. That link is in the episode description like normal. Give us a rate, review. Make sure you subscribe to get the notifications for our new episodes. And that's it. We'll see you on Friday. We hope you keep listening and remember to.
Watch the monsters.
And don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.